Joining us now, as he does each and every week, to talk about the latest in Michigan politics is Professor of Political Science at Oakland University, Dave Dulio, who also serves as the director of their Center for Civic Engagement. Dave, thanks for being with us again today.
Hey, Tyler, thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you on, as the big story here in the state of Michigan and our politics right now has been over the past week, both the House and the Senate have passed bills repealing the 2012 so-called right-to-work law here in the state of Michigan. Still got a little bit of a ways to go in the process before it eventually does reach the governor's desk. But this has been a critical issue for the Democrats, both as they went into the 2022 election and now that they have the power in all the branches of the legislature as well as in the executive office to get rid of right to work. What about this issue has made it so divisive between these two parties? Because it really comes down to how much of an impact unions have on our labor force.
Well, I think that part of it goes back to the way in which right to work was passed originally, which was during the lame duck session at the end of the legislature that year, and it was done as a last ditch effort. At the time, Governor Snyder said that he wasn't terribly interested in it as a legislative agenda item. But the legislature passed it and he signed it. I think that Democrats have been eyeing a way to get rid of it since then. And they are fulfilling a campaign promise that they made in the 22 cycle to do just that. I think that there are some interesting aspects to this, though. I mean, if we're totally honest about it, I think there's some intriguing messaging that Democrats are using here when they talk about restoring worker freedom, when it's really the opposite of that, right? When what this will do is make individuals who work at a union business, they must join the union. And I think the other thing here is that Democrats have tried to and are going to make this something that cannot be overturned by a referendum, by a vote of the people, because they have put in an appropriation amount. They've put in spending into this legislation, and when that happens, that policy is ineligible to be overturned by referendum. What's two other interesting things about this? One, the governor has said that she's opposed to doing just this. And when she was in the Senate and campaigning for governor, she said she would not sign bills that referendum proof a policy item. Yet she's going to sign this one. I think that one thing to be on the lookout for is that those who are for right to work, I think you'll see them move to do a constitutional amendment to restore right to work in Michigan. And I would bet that gets on the ballot in 2024. And if that sounds like it's violating what I just said, referendum proof, a referendum is different than a constitutional amendment. So, it's interesting to me that they are going to go through with this and make it referendum proof. They know that the other side is going to try to, I think, do a constitutional amendment.
Especially when you're on an issue like this that can kind of bounce between the different sides of the political spectrum, because it affects people's ability to work in their workplace or in their sector of the workforce altogether. And so that may not just be a Democrat versus Republican issue, which could give that some steam in the 2024 election, much like we had in the case of abortion on the previous election ballot.
Yeah, we've seen the parties in the last many election cycles, actually, going back to the 90s, use ballot initiatives, whether a legislative referendum or a constitutional amendment. We've seen them use these issues strategically to try and drive turnout for their side of the aisle. I think that there's unquestionably a element of the abortion proposal last cycle was to drive turnout, no doubt about it.
We're joined by Dave Dulio on today's edition of the Megacast, professor of political science at Oakland University, where he also serves as the director for their Center for Civic Engagement. You can keep up to date on everything going on at the Center for Civic Engagement by visiting oakland.edu/CCE, and you can also follow them on their Facebook page as well. Just search for Oakland University Center for Civic Engagement for more information. And Dave, in the recent weeks, we have learned about President Jimmy Carter. His health has taken a turn for the worst, and he's gone into hospice care as he prepares for the end of his life. This week, he asked President Joe Biden, according to reports from NPR and other news outlets, to deliver the eulogy at his funeral upon his death. We'll talk about the lasting impact of Jimmy Carter in politics on the national level, because one-term president, not regarded necessarily as one of the greatest presidents policy-wise, but one of the best people to ever serve as president, has really been the lasting legacy of Jimmy Carter. But really, let's dive into that and what really he did to impact American politics and what it means to be the president of the United States.
So, I think for his time in office, I think you're right. He's not seen as one of the greatest presidents, and that's because he was in office during a time of pretty troubling economic times, right? I mean, when we think about the inflation that is running rampant today, right? Over the last summer, it was up around 8%. We just got some numbers the other day that in February it was 6% year to year. When we make comparisons about, this is the highest inflation in 40 years. Well, that's Carter, and that is a problem when we look at his presidency through history, right? That's certainly a drag on his time in office. But I think, in fact, his not as big or something that has had as big of an impact as his time in office, but we have to I think look at Jimmy Carter as in the whole. And his time out of office was spent on all sorts of things, trying to make a difference around the world, and he really through his foundation and other work really left a mark post presidency.
Yeah, and that kind of brings me to this idea of looking at presidencies from years beyond and what history does to kind of redefine someone's administration well after they have surpassed their time in the White House. Do we find that, how a better way to phrase this may be, politically speaking, as time goes on and we really have more context to the impact of one presidential administration or one iteration of Congress, so we typically see that history tends to be more friendly to the legacy of these presidencies well after they pass, or do those legacies tend to stay more consistent over time?
I think that depends who we're talking about. I think that in some yes and no, right? I think that in many cases it does get better over time, but there are others that remain relatively negative, right? But I think Carter is one that folks have, maybe the enough time has passed that enough people have forgotten, or it's been mitigated in their thoughts. But certainly his work after his time in the White House has an impact on the way people think about it.
Yeah, Carter, 98 years old, is the longest living American president and was elected as I mentioned earlier, President Joe Biden's been asked to deliver his eulogy. Was actually the first senator to endorse President Carter for president outside of the state of Georgia way back in 1976 during Biden's early time in the Senate in the 70s. Dave, a couple more minutes with you before we'll say goodbye today. I want to give you another opportunity, as always, to talk about the Center for Civic Engagement. We know you just had a really important discussion on anti-Semitism that included President Ora Hirsch-Peskovitz, and there's plenty of other programs that are to come, and especially over the next couple of years as we go into a major presidential election cycle. But just talk about in general the Center for Civic Engagement and all the other ways that people can get involved, both on campus at Oakland University if they're a student or if they're on the staff, or from the general community.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. We did just last week have a really engaging discussion about anti-Semitism, and and the rise of anti-Semitic incidents across the country, as well as on college campuses. And that we've seen that in places like the University of Denver. We've seen it at Michigan State. We've seen it at Harvard, and you name it. It's probably existed. I think. And if folks are interested in seeing that discussion, they can find it. It's posted to our Facebook page, but you can also find it on our YouTube channel, YouTube/@OU-CCE. And all of not all, many of our past programs are there that you can find. And if folks are interested in getting involved and want to know more about it, they can, as you mentioned, get to our website, oakland.edu/CCE, or they can email me. I'm happy to talk with folks about ways to get involved either on campus or in other ways in the civic engagement world.
Oakland.edu/CCE is their website. If you would like to watch on demand their office hours on anti-Semitism, youtube.com/@OU-CCE. Dave, thanks as always for joining us.
You got it. Thanks for having me.